Hello and welcome to episode 36 of Let's Hear It. Today's episode is with legendary rock photographer Jay Blakesberg. I think I can call him legendary because he's over 40 years in at this point and has shot some of the greatest rock photos probably of the last 40 plus years. And he has also put out a bunch of books. He's made films, concert films, and he's a ubiquitous presence at music festivals. You see him all the time, and he's always getting amazing pictures. Today's show, we're going to talk about this book he put out about 5 years ago called Guitars That Jam. Has amazing photos in it of so many great people that you'd know. And the cool thing I love about this book is that it's small. And a lot of the times when you get these coffee table type books of guitars or rock photography, they're gigantic and beautiful, but you just don't open them up all that often because you have to get out on the table. And this is something you can just walk around with and look at anytime you want. And it's got great stories in it about each guitar, and really amazing project. And let's say hello to Jay Blakesberg. Hi, Jay.
Hey, what's going on, Gary? Good to see you. Thanks for having me on your show. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm good to see you too. I just figured, we've done a lot of episodes about instruments, and I think talking to you about your perspective as a photographer of seeing all these great musicians play these classic instruments and getting iconic photographs that you've taken would just be fun. So what we'll do is we'll look at 10 or 11 selections that I picked from the book, and you can tell us some stories about them. And we have a bit in common because we both grew up in New Jersey. You're a couple years older than me, but I would call it the same time frame. And tell us a little bit about the first couple shows you ever saw and when you decided, I got to take some pictures of these shows.
So my first concert was on Halloween night in 1975, and it was the Doobie Brothers, the Outlaws, and Poco at Madison Square Garden.
Fantastic.
And I think my next two shows, and I can never remember which one happened first, but they were both in 76 within a few weeks of each other. One was the Eagles and Joe Walsh and maybe Boz Scaggs at Roosevelt at Roosevelt Stadium, I guess it was. Yeah. And then Jethro Tull at Shea Stadium. I remember
Wow.
when I went to those two concerts, my mother, when I was getting ready to buy concert tickets to somewhere else, my mother said something like, "You've been to 3 concerts in the last 2 years. Isn't that enough concerts to go to?" It's just like a funny thing now in my life, well, pre-COVID, where, we'd see live music 3 or 4 or 5 times a week.
Yeah.
So, it was more getting closer to 77, where I was starting to maybe think about a camera. I remember getting brought to a Jerry Garcia band show with an older friend of mine. He was in my brother and sister's grade, a guy named Craig Lockwood, still lives in New Jersey. And he brought a camera to that Jerry show down at Convention Hall in Asbury Park. And then a year later, I shot the Grateful Dead for the first time, which was in September of 1978. And, I was taking pictures at that point just so I could make 8x10s in my darkroom and hang them on my bedroom wall, just kind of creating my own memorabilia. But, what happened is, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, is that these photos have become a record of certain bit of little pop culture history that, us rock and roll people really like. And so some of the early stuff that I shot when I was still in high school was Neil Young at Madison Square Garden and Bob Dylan at Madison Square Garden. And I used to go shoot David Bromberg all the time, big Bromberg fan back then. Riders of the Purple Sage, Muddy Waters. I think you and me talked about this on a different stream a while ago was it the Stanhope House? Was that
Yeah.
right? I used to go to some shows there also. But I loved all that stuff. I loved all the blues and things like that. And so, one of my favorite early photos that I took is a picture of Muddy Waters, Johnny Winter, James Cotton, and B.B. King all together at Radio City Music Hall in June of 79, about 2 weeks after I graduated from high school. I got to shoot Lowell George when I was in high school. Actually, I might have just graduated. That might have been June of 79 also. I shot him like 2 or 3 days before he died down at a little crazy nightclub in South Jersey called Alexander's, which was by daytime, it was a strip club, pole dancing New Jersey strip club. And by nighttime, it was a rock and roll little venue. And So, I got lucky to shoot some early stuff and really loved photography and loved what it did for me and how it made me connect to my friends and making 8x10s and giving them to them to hang on their bedroom walls. And, it was like we didn't know it at the time, but in a sense, it was an early form of social media, I mean, it was this thing, like here's a picture of the Charlie Daniels band that I took last week, hang it on your wall. And it sort of connected us. And for me, it sort of was a way for me to, discover and figure out who I was as a teenager. Because, when we're teenagers, we're all stupid and awkward and unsure of ourselves. And that was a way for me to figure out what my place in the script was by being that kid with the camera.
And one of the things that, anyone who is, younger than us doesn't know about, but back in those days, you had to smuggle your camera in if you were a young dude and you didn't have a photographer pass. They did not let people bring cameras into concerts. And,
that started in in the 80s, the early 80s, like I'm on 81, 82. So like still when I was in high school, 78, 79, you could actually still bring a camera into most concerts. The corporate world was just a few years later that it started to sort of take hold and there started to be restrictions on that. But the Grateful Dead, for instance, never, ever required anybody to have a photo pass the entire career from the beginning till Jerry Garcia died. If you were a fan, you were allowed to bring a camera into the building, which is why there's such a rich archive of Grateful Dead photos. And a large selection of the ones that I took of the Grateful Dead were just as a fan in the audience and bringing my camera. So, but yes, you are right. And a couple years after that, you had to start getting credentialed or sneak your camera in, and we had to be resourceful. And we'd hide a lens, in one place, and you'd give a camera body to your girlfriend and put it under her skirt, tied to her waist, and whatever it took. So yes, you're right.
Yeah. Well, that's a good place to start because the Grateful Dead has obviously been a continuing thread through your work, just because you saw them in so many great places starting in 1978. So what I've done here is I picked out some of the images from the book, and we'll show some of those and talk about them, and you can tell us a little story about each one.
That sounds good.
So here we go. Here's number one, which is, of course, the classic Jerry Garcia with his Doug Irwin Wolf guitar. So tell us about this picture, what you remember about this. And obviously you got up close. So what was your technique in those days?
Right. So first of all, the one thing I do want to say about this particular book is that all of the stories about the guitars were written by the artist, by the person whose guitar it is, except in the case of Jerry, who was dead. There's, I think, 3 or 4 pages in the entire book that were researched and written by other people. I think Neil Young's guitars was actually written by Larry Craig, his guitar tech, is who we interviewed for that. And the Jerry Garcia guitar, it's excerpt from Blair Jackson, who did a book called Grateful Gear. But other than that, all the actual artists wrote the stories about these guitars. So the photograph of Jerry was taken on 11/24/78 at the Capitol Theater in Passaic, New Jersey. And it was the second time I photographed the Grateful Dead. And it was a special concert for Deadheads where you actually had to write a letter and mail it to the P.O. box in San Rafael, California, to get a special code that you were allowed to then go buy the tickets. And it's funny, I've been cleaning up and organizing my archives lately just to get them organized. And I found a letter that I wrote, and it was basically like, hey, my dog ate my letter with the code. Can you send me a new one? And I got a letter back from the Grateful Dead office that said, sorry, you need your serial number code in order to be able to buy your tickets. And then it turned out that the guy who ran the box office up at the Capitol Theater in Passaic, which was a legendary concert venue in the 70s, John Scher ran it, 70s, 80s, and on. It turns out the guy in the box office, his mother was friends with my best friend from high school's mother. And so he sold us 2 tickets for $10 each. And brought my camera into the show and took those photographs. And the actual shot of Wolf guitar, the close-up detail shot, was actually taken recently at the Fillmore in San Francisco. And, Neil Cassell has played that guitar. I have some really beautiful photos of Neil playing the Wolf guitar. But this particular shot here, I think, is just on the couch in the dressing room because for a number of years, currently Wolf resides with a gentleman in Massachusetts. But back, 5 years or so ago, it lived in Mill Valley, California, a guy owned it, and he started to let it out to play with different artists. And actually, I believe Lebo from the band ALO was playing it that night. A friend of the guy who owned it was friends with Lebo. He brought it to the show, and I took that photograph of Jerry's Wolf guitar. But of course, it's a super special guitar, right? It was the first definitive Irwin guitar built for Garcia. Irwin, I believe, was a Alembic guitar builder, so he worked for Alembic, making a lot of those incredible basses that you saw in the late '60s and early '70s. Jack Cassidy from the Airplanes, Hot Tuna played one, and I know they retroed some other Frankenstein, some basses for Phil Lesh at Alembic, and all sorts of, I think Stanley Clark, right? Is that his name? Stanley Clark, the bass player?
Yeah, Stanley Clark.
I think he played one, and Dave Torbert from the band Kingfish and the New Riders. A lot of people play these beautiful. If you see them out there now, they're gorgeous, these old Alembic basses. And they made one called Mission Control that recently came up for auction. But anyway, and a guy in Southern California owns it, a Deadhead. So Irwin left Alembic and went out on his own, and he built this guitar for Garcia. And if you look at it, there's that wolf is inlaid into it on the bottom there. But I just found a photograph from '73 of Garcia playing this guitar, taken by a guy named Alvin Meyerowitz, and there's no wolf on it and no wolf sticker on it. So what happened was there were just those two stripes underneath the bridge there, and those wooden stripes that were built into the guitar, right? I think mahogany, whatever it is. And then Garcia put a wolf sticker on it, or somebody did, Parrish, his guitar tech, somebody. And then I think they liked that, so the guitar went back to Irwin, and he cut it out and inlaid the actual wolf inlay in, I don't know what it is, wood, mother of pearl, not really sure what it is. And that's how that guitar basically became Wolf. And, the guitar is still out there. It was sold a couple years ago at auction for close to $2 million. And the guy who owns it is very generous and has let a bunch of people play it over the last couple of years, including John Mayer with Dead & Co. played it at Citi Field last June 20, not the one that just passed because we were in COVID, the June before that at Citi Field in New York. And John Mayer called me one day and said, Jay, I have this feeling, this calling that maybe I want to try and play Wolf with Dead & Co. And I know you're the guy that can make it happen. And so I connected him with the people that own Wolf and handle Wolf, and we made it happen. And it was an epic, legendary show that John played with that guitar, and the fans were just ecstatic to see it out there.
That's great.
Super cool.
Great. Well, here's the next one I'm going to show you, which is George Porter Jr. from the Meters playing a Lakeland bass, a 2009 Lakeland Bob Glaub model. Bob Glaub is a great friend of mine, and he might not be a household name that everybody knows, but he's one of the great bass players of all time. He's played with everybody from Jackson Browne to Springsteen to John Lennon to all kinds of people, and on tons and tons of sessions as well, recording sessions. And this Lakeland bass was modeled after Bob's 1964 Fender Precision bass. So George Porter, of course, from the Meters, one of the greats. And George has had a great last 10, 15 years in the jam world and plays with all kinds of people. So tell us about this.
Yeah, so I wanted to do him with his Fender bass that goes way, way back to the Meters. He had been playing it for years and years and years and bringing it on the road. And I do have photographs of him, but he asked me if he could do this bass because he no longer takes that Fender bass on the road, because it's such a special, important, historical artifact, and he's just nervous about it. But it was it was also a guitar that was getting very old. And so he tapped into this Lakeland bass. And now, that's been his main bass that he takes on the road for years. I think here in the story, he says that it's modeled after his Fender Precision bass, which I guess is out of P bass, right?
Yeah.
Right. The P bass is the Precision bass. And so, He, it was modeled after that because he had that same feel look. And I wanted George in the book because, George is just legendary beyond anything. I mean, truly, one of the great innovators and bass players, of our time, obviously starting with the meters and the funky meters. And as you said, he's had this incredible resurgence over the last 15, 20 years, in the jam world, playing with all sorts of stellar people that, probably worshipped George, and George was this guy that was playing in bars probably for, $100 a night, $200 a night for years and years, until this sort of resurrection of his career and his status in the world of music. Sometimes it takes a long time for people to, that had big successes and were so important maybe in the 60s and 70s to sort of come back in the 90s or the 2000s. Even the Allman Brothers, at the end of their career were playing big venues and big rooms, but, going back into the 90s, they were a club band, or a theater band, I should say, not clubs, but, they were playing with 2,000 people a night. And then all of a sudden, it ebbs and flows and cycles. And George is like one of those people where it does that.
Being from New Jersey, did you ever make the trek to the Nook in Hackettstown, New Jersey?
Never did the Nook, no.
I saw Greg Allman there a couple times in the 83, 84 time era. Right. Not the greatest, but fun to see.
How big was that room? How many people did the Nook hold? 500
maybe.
Right. Here's Greg Allman, like Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Greg Allman, 500 people, but that's like the flow of a career,
Yeah. Well, I think the Allman Brothers really, when they got Warren Haynes in the band there in the late 80s, that's when they had their resurgence. And we'll talk about Warren in a few. But let's move to this next one, which is Grace Potter on this really cool looking custom made Gibson Flying V. I guess that's her signature guitar. And she forgot her shoes for this shot, but I think that's her trademark as well.
So I love photographing Grace Potter, and I photographed her many, 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 many times. We've become friends. I did another book a couple of years ago called Hippie Chick, which is all about women and women music fans and connecting to rock and roll. And Grace Potter wrote the afterword for that book, and Grace Slick from the Jefferson Airplane wrote the foreword for that book. And so I just think that Grace Potter is just such a rock and roll badass on stage, both on guitar and, Hammond B3. And, we talked about which guitar we might want to do for her, and I think we settled on this one. And this photograph here, this is from the Lock and Music Festival. And she just crushes it, and I believe she has 2 or 3 or 4 of these Flying V guitars. I know she has a blonde looking one. And, she's just so fun to photograph. And I think it's important that, we show and share these women who just truly, truly can rock it. And so, for me, it was just thrilling to have her included in this, and that she wanted to be included in this. And I love those photographs. So there you have it. Barefoot.
And it's a cool looking Flying V. I actually saw Gibson did a reverse Flying V, a limited edition. So the Flying V is completely flipped around, which is kind of nutty looking. But I'll show one of those too. But moving along here, talking about nutty looking, how about this one? The awesome Jerry Jones double neck, and that's Nels Cline from Wilco. Of course, Nels has been around for many years, played in the jazz world, and joined Wilco maybe 15 years ago or so. And there he is with that Jerry Jones double neck. What do you know about this one?
So I don't know much about this guitar, but I know that Nels Cline is one of the most phenomenal guitar players in existence today. I'm a huge fan of Nels. I'm a huge fan of Wilco. I saw Nels, pre-Wilco numerous times in numerous different projects that he played in. I believe I saw him do a trio with Mike Watt from, the Minutemen and Firehose. I've seen him play with, God, what was the name of that band that he was in the 80s? I can't remember at the moment. Anyway, just love Nels so much that, I could not have him. And he loves nothing more than to talk about guitars. Like, this is his world, right? And he has an incredible, and I believe we have Nels in this book twice. maybe with a jazz master or something. Maybe is the other shot.
Yeah, I saw that.
Right, and he just he wrote these stories because he is so rich in history and technique and like I don't know who Jerry Jones is, like like when I don't. I looked at this and I thought this was a Dan Electro double neck, and maybe it's modeled after that. Maybe Jerry Jones. Like again, I'm not this mega guitar geek. I look at these instruments as pieces of art, and I photograph art and artists. Right. So for me, like the words that he wrote about this guitar tells that story. Right. Yeah. And like that across the board on all of these. But like I'm smart enough to know that a 56 Les Paul is special. I've talked to enough musicians about, vintage and years and models and the book cover is a picture of Jackie Green, which I believe is it the blue? What's on the cover of the guitar? Which color is it? Which one is it? Oh yeah, that's like a 335 or something.
It's a Gibson, yeah. Classic red 335.
A Les Paul, but it's the SG body shape, but it's old enough that it was still called the Les Paul, but Les Paul hated that model. So he made Gibson change the name of it to the SG because he didn't want that to be his Les Paul. So, most people think of the Les Paul, the curved, basic, standard sunburst Les Paul, right? Yeah. And so I've learned a lot just talking to musicians, but I am not a guitar aficionado by any sense of the word. But I know enough to get me in trouble, and I know enough when I see a beautiful guitar, and also know that it's important because I like to talk to these people about this and learn about this. It's intriguing to me to learn about, why a Gibson pre-war, dreadnought, whatever is, what I mean? Like, I get it. I get the sound. I get the feel. I get the energy from talking to my musician friends.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Guitar Mojo, this one certainly has it. And it's the first acoustic guitar we're showing. It's Derek Trucks, which a lot of people are used to seeing him with his old red Gibson SG, but here he is with this amazing Gibson L00 from the 30s that he plays quite often. I actually just saw him on a charity web stream a couple nights ago with Susan Tedeschi, and he was playing this very guitar. And of course, he's really one of the great guitar players out there right now. So what do you know about this one?
He played this at the Lock-In Festival, which is where we shot this, and they did a little, mini acoustic set in the middle of their electric set. And I think when I talked to Derek about this guitar, like, he felt like it sort of brought back, that old time, Robert Johnson, Elmore James, like it had like, it's such an old vintage guitar, but it's got that feel. It's got that vibe. I mean, in 1936, I'm guessing that this guitar was like a $10 guitar or a $5 guitar. And because it was, it probably was like still a top of the line guitar. I'm sure there were plenty of cheap guitars out there that people play still to this day because they're weird and funky and they're 40 or 60 or 80 or 100 years old or whatever. But that guitar I've never seen one that was like that color, that black with that pick guard. Like, I feel like all the older guitars that I've seen are all brown wooden. I'm guessing this is painted black.
No, I think they did put these out in black for a little while.
Okay.
And there's been some reissues of them as well through the years. So I think that is the original color.
Yeah. And I think that, Derek Derek is unbelievable. I mean, I've seen Derek play Duane Allman's gold top Les Paul from the Allman Brothers on stage. And I think actually that's even in this book also. We did that. Derek has all those beautiful SGs, which is what he's most known for playing on stage with Clapton and his band and everything else. And so, I felt like he really liked that we featured this guitar in this book because it's such a unique guitar. And I think that he also liked that we featured the Greg Allman Les Paul in there as well, because he's one of a handful of people that have gotten to play that over the years. It's sort of like the Jerry Garcia Wolf guitar. I believe that the Duane Allman Les Paul for a long time was owned by Duane's daughter Galadriel, who lives here in the Bay Area, but it lived at the Big House Museum, the Allman Brothers Museum in Macon. And
Yeah.
I was down in Macon about 2 years ago, and they took it out of the safe for me and let me hold it and showed it to me. It was at the museum was closed that day. They gave us a private tour, and it was incredible. But I think since then, that guitar has been sold to a collector, but it still gets to live at the big house, I believe, like 6 months out of the year or something like that. But before, while Galadriel still owned it, it went out to people like Derek and Warren to play here and there. And but again, just this legendary guitar, which is, I think, to me, having the Les Paul or even this acoustic one, like the Les Paul, I'm pretty sure that's what he played on Layla. I mean, that kind of gives you chills when you really think about the history that was made with some of these guitars. And even though we don't know all the backstory about this acoustic guitar, I'm sure there was some history made somewhere along the way from somebody who had it. And it could have even been a kid in a bedroom, 50 years ago that discovered rock and roll or the blues or whatever. And now it's making history in Derek's hands.
Yeah. Now that's the fun of if the guitars could talk, the stories they would tell. So this next one, speaking of history and legendary, is Neil Young with a 1939 Martin D28, which was originally owned by Hank Williams, of course, the godfather of country music, I would call him. Obviously, the Carter family and Jimmy Rogers, but Hank Williams emerged in the late 40s, early 50s as like one of the first true kind of big stars, rock stars, and made an incredible amount of recordings and then died at age 29 in 1953. So Neil got this guitar, and we've all seen Neil Young with this guitar, and we'll have some more Neil Young because, of course, he's had some of the most legendary ones. But what do you know about this guitar and this picture?
Yeah, so this was taken at the Bridge School benefit, which happened for 30 years here in the Bay Area to raise funds for the school that his kid had gone to, that they started for just developmentally disabled kids. And this is a beautiful guitar. I mean, I even know that. And of course, the history behind it with Hank Williams is amazing. But a funny story is that at one of the Bridge schools right around 2009, or maybe, actually, I think it was 2005. I'm sorry, right around 2005. I got an assignment to do a portrait with Neil Young for Esquire magazine. And I wanted to do it with this guitar, but I actually decided just to sort of do it with the guitar case. The guitar was in it. And so Larry Craig, who's Neil's guitar tech back then, he's not anymore. Larry Craig is a legendary, renowned guitar repair person. He lives here in the Bay Area. I believe Neil tapped into him somewhere around Woodstock, and he worked for Neil for 35 or 40 years. Larry's also a brilliant photographer. So anyway, so Larry said to me, I said, Larry, I'm going to do this photograph of Neil Young after he finishes sitting in with Los Lobos. That's when Neil agreed to do this quick 5-minute photo shoot for Esquire. And I said, and he agreed to have the Hank Williams guitar in the photograph. And so Larry said, okay, let me show you where I have it stored. And he walked me into a tractor trailer, like a big equipment truck, and inside of it was a metal case that had a padlock on it. And inside that, there was like 4 or 5 guitars stored in there. And he said, listen, about 10 minutes before they end this set, I'll go in and I'll unlock this for you. No one else is going to walk in there. There's security outside. And when you're ready, because I'm going to be busy doing a set change, right? Because Neil's coming off stage, he's going to hand me whatever guitar he's playing. And so you just walk in there and you just grab it. It's this one right here, he showed me. And you walk out and you do your thing. And then when you're done, do me a favor, put it back. I said, okay. So I'm with my son, who at the time is maybe, I don't know, 10 years old, 11 years old, something like that. And I go into Neil comes off stage. I go in there, I grab the case, I hand it to my son. And Sam, my son Sam's holding the guitar case, and Neil Young walks off stage, and we meet where we said we're going to meet. And he looks at me and he looks at my son Sam, this 10-year-old kid holding this Hank Williams guitar. He goes, hey, Sonny, let me take that from you. Because it's like this legendary fucking guitar, right? That my 10-year-old son is holding on to. It was just like, I wish I'd gotten a picture of that moment or, video or something, but of course it all happened very quickly. But anyway, so that was how we got that shot that I was just talking about for Esquire. But these are just shots from him playing on stage, and you can see how worn this guitar is. And Larry Craig, I think, also talks about how Neil has a lot of guitars, and he's got a lot of really expensive, brand new type, guitars. But he's still, Neil's a vintage guy. Look at the cars that he drives. He loves all these old vintage cars, and so. That's sort of the vibe with Neil and this guitar.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of Neil, now we'll look at him with probably his most well-known guitar, which is this 1953 Gibson Les Paul, which he dubbed Old Black.
Yes.
And played on all the great 70s stuff and on Rust Never Sleeps. And if you've seen Neil electric with Crazy Horse, you've seen and heard this guitar, which is one of the most enormous sounding electric guitars that you'll ever hear.
Yeah, this has got a lot of history behind this guitar. What was it? Originally gold, I think, and then they repainted it black. The first time I ever photographed Neil Young, which was at Madison Square Garden in 1979, I believe, this guitar was played. And so, yeah, like you said, this was just, legendary. The detail shot there was shot on the CSNY 2K tour. They flew me into Salt Lake City to shoot the first show of the tour because they needed like press photos and things like that. The live shot was taken up in Seattle in 2012. So actually the detail shot's actually shot on film, and the other shot of Neil is shot digitally. Most of the images in this book are shot digitally. Jerry Garcia obviously is shot on film, but the detail shot was digital. And when I asked Larry about this guitar, he said, I said, can I take a picture of it sitting in the little rack that he had? And he said, oh, wait a second. And he stacked up like 3 or 4 guitars for me. The Gretsch, the Les Paul, the Gold Top, an acoustic. I think there's 4 or 5 guitars, something like that. And he goes, okay, now you have all of the guitars that Neil wrote pretty much all of his most important songs on up until that point. Like when I took that picture, he hadn't gotten the Hank Williams guitar yet. I'm sure he's written songs on that since then. But up until that point, it had these 4 or 5 guitars. And it's a beautiful photograph that I've sort of made into this collage almost of multiple images together. I use this old 60s vintage camera that's called a half frame camera. It actually takes a half a picture at a time. It takes a half of a 35 millimeter frame at a time vertically, not horizontally. So 2 verticals equals 1 horizontal 35 millimeter. And I did it like in little sections. I turned the camera sideways so they became horizontal, right opposite from regular camera. And I shot like the neck and the headstock, and then the neck, and then the neck, and then the bridge, and then the bottom. And I sort of made this collage that's like 4 or 5 images that's long and thin of these legendary guitars. But yes, I mean, and today, I know we're not broadcasting this today, but today is Neil Young's 75th birthday.
Yeah, I saw that this morning. That's great.
We're recording this on November 12th, 2020, and Neil was born November 12th, 1945.
A very magical day.
Yeah.
And then speaking of Gibson Les Pauls, now this one is one of the holy grails of electric guitars, the 1959 Gibson Les Paul with Warren Haynes. And Warren wrote the foreword to the Guitars That Jam book. And I read that this morning, and he really said something great about you, which I believe is true, which is that great musicians and great photographers have, they're very similar in that they understand when a special moment happens, and they go with it. So, there's all kinds of amazing photographers in the world, and photographing live music is a particular skill. And the more you learn, the more you know what to watch for. And I think that's one of your great skills. And because you've seen so many shows, you know what to watch for. And I love that Warren said that about you, that's the way he thinks of you, as an improviser and spontaneous. And when that special moment happens, you know how to get it. So.
Very kind of Warren. Warren and I have become good friends over the years, and photographed him many, many, many times. Love Warren to death. And I think that in this essay that he wrote here, he talks about, the 3 big great years of Gibson Les Pauls were 57, 58, 59. Again, these guitars are just works of art. The wood grain, the finishes, the sounds, the history, like all combined. People look at my photographs now. At one point, we took photographs and they were just a document. They were a historical record. And over time they become fine art, right? Because people can connect to these photographs as art. As we know, Neil Cassell's photography, which we just finished a project on, we'll talk about later, I think. People look at this photography and it's not just a moment in time. It's something that connects and resonates with people, and people look at a photograph of, let's say, Warren Haynes from that show, and that particular photograph is taken in State College, PA, at a concert called Deadheads for Obama, and it was a big fundraiser that I'm sorry, the Deadheads for Obama was the month before at the Warfield in San Francisco, but this was a Obama fundraiser the next month in October. And it was the Allman Brothers and the Dead at the time. It was the Dead with Warren in that band. So Warren did double duty that night, played with the Allman Brothers and played with the Dead. And so that's where that photo of him playing live is from. But again, I try and approach what I'm doing as a documentarian, as a historian, as a visual anthropologist, and as an artist, as a fine artist, because I think that these photographs are that all of us are taking, all these photographers that are documenting this pop culture history are going to be looked at and examined for, decades and decades. And as long as the electronic media can survive, all the changes and ebbs and flows, then I think people are going to think about the photos of David Bowie in 73, and what they mean to us now versus at the time they were just photos of this guy who dressed weird, right? Do you know what I mean? And now it's so important to our history as musicians, music fans, pop culture freaks and geeks, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I agree. Well, here's a freaky one. I love this one.
Very, very happy that Warren wrote the foreword for the book.
Well, here's Mike Gordon with a custom 2014 Moira bass. Tell us about this one, because I know you're involved with this one a little bit.
Yeah. So originally, I wanted Mike to do what his, one of his normal fish basses, and he said he did not. He really wanted to do this bass, and this is a bass that he had custom made, the Moray bass, and shot this in San Francisco at the Fillmore. And he was super excited when I sent him these photos, because he had already seen these photos before the idea for the book came up. And so when I asked him about doing his regular bass that he plays with Fish, he's like, no, let's do the Moray. I love those pictures you took at the Fillmore, and it's just so cool and it's different. And when he does his own band, so this was the Mike Gordon solo band, with Steve Murawski on guitar, and they had a custom guitar made for Scott Murawski, not Steve. They had a custom guitar made for Scott and for Mike that sort of matched, and there's LED lights on the neck, but also the actual moire pattern that you're seeing there changes colors. It goes red and green and blue, and so there are these LEDs that were built on it. And it's Mike is, to me, Mike is a visionary. Mike is a genius. Mike is brilliant. He thinks way beyond. He's like in the school of like a David Bowie, but a Peter Gabriel, circa Genesis, right? Like being on stage, it's a performance. It's not just we're playing music. There's a whole visual element to the whole thing. And so when he did his solo, and they do that in Fish as well. They do a lot of different things, specifically New Year's Eve, but in other times as well. They have things that enhance the music visually. So for Mike to have these basses custom made for his solo projects and for him to play it, I think was a big leap as part of his whole visual presentation to go along with the music.
Yeah. And then we have his buddy here, just Trey, with his 2002 Paul Languedoc hollow body custom guitar. And I think Paul was, might have been Trey's college roommate. And And anybody who likes Fish or Trey solo stuff has seen this guitar many, many times.
Yeah, so I believe that this is the main Fish guitar because he has a bunch of Languedocs. Paul was the sound man for Fish for many, many years until they went on hiatus. And then when they came back, I think Paul retired and decided he just wanted to make guitars. He also made some bass guitars. I know at least one, I'm guessing several Languedoc bass guitars for Mike Gordon. And so back in like when I first started to shoot Fish around 93-ish, I believe, Mike was playing a Languedoc bass and Trey was playing a Languedoc guitar, not this one because this one was made in 2002, but Paul has made several of them over the years. And I think that this 2002 one became his sort of main one in his more recent years with Fish. This particular shot is actually taken at the Brooklyn Bowl during the Trey Anastasio band. It was a videotaping for like a PBS special or something like that. And Trey really spent a lot of time writing the copy for this. He's not an easy guy to nail down. He's always busy. His mind is always racing on to the next project. And he wrote this and submitted it. And then he rewrote it and submitted it again. And then he said, let me reserve the right to just change it one more time. Give me a warning that you're a week out or 2 weeks out from like, you can't change it anymore after that. And I gave him one more warning and he changed it again because he really wanted to talk about, how important this guitar was and what it meant to him. And so, I mean, that's the beauty of this book is that these people took this very seriously because they, these artists, these musicians who are all always so busy, but they realize how important these instruments are to themselves, their music and their sound and their identities, that they spent the time for me, which is an honor and a privilege for me that they did that. And, we got to make this book that sort of recognized people. And of course, there's a lot of other people in this book that, we didn't even get to, Luther Dickinson and, who's, one of the most phenomenal players, and Jackie Green, a really dear friend of mine, who, that's who the cover photo is. And we have Jackie in the book as well. And, the list goes on and on. I mean, we have Chris Robinson in there. We have some bluegrass guys like Vince Herman and Drew Emmett from Leftover Salmon, and Adam from, and Ben from Yonder Mountain String Band, Jeff Austin with a beautiful vintage mandolin, and Keller Williams, Rich Robinson from the Black Crowes, Anders Osborne. The guitars that we have of Anders in here, I believe is his famous Butterfly.
59 Stratocaster, I think, or 72
years ago. Stolen here in California, and he never got it back. And that was like one of his most important guitars. We have Mahali from Twiddle, who, plays these beautiful custom guitars, and Lucas Nelson from, Willie's son, who plays, I think, a beautiful old 50s Gibson guitar.
Yeah.
Michael Kang and Bill Nershi from String Cheese, Mark Brownstein from Disco Biscuits, along with John from Disco Biscuits. We have Grace Potter's other two guitar players at the times. We have all the guys from My Morning Jacket in here. Mm-hmm. We have Stanley Jordan, who has like this beautiful custom-made guitar for his tapping that he does. So, there's a lot of really cool stuff. Susan Tedeschi, of course, is in here. Les Claypool is in here with a beautiful custom-made bass. So, that's how the book came about. And again, this book still is in print. But if you want to get signed copies directly from me for yourself or friends or holiday gifts, just go to my website, which is rockoutbooks.com. And there's a place where you can send me a note with who to sign it to, and I can personalize it and whatnot. So rockoutbooks.com is my website where you can find.
That's great. And it really is, if you have a music lover that you're looking for a holiday gift for, this is a great, great gift. There's so much great stuff in it.
Thank you.
And just, I guess the last couple of things. So you and I were lucky enough to work together the last year on a beautiful photography book of our late friend Neil Cassell's photography. And what I love about this, I love that you took this project on, and I sent you like 10 bins of Neil's photos. And your daughter, Ricky, is obviously a chip off the old block, because I know she put in so much hard work to make this book beautiful. And this is the book, Tomorrow's Sky, Photographs by Neil Cassell. And Ricky just did such a great job going through thousands and thousands of photographs, and I'm sure you gave her wise advice along the way. But tell us a little bit about this.
Sure. And I also do want to mention that in the guitar book we do have Neil Cassell.
Yeah,
And
we do. And there he is. That's
yeah,
Neil playing his Scott Walker guitar. And Neil
right.
got that guitar in 2014. I'd actually seen an article in Fretboard Journal, which is a beautiful guitar magazine. And there was a interview and some beautiful photographs, Scott Walker. And I sent it to Neil, and I was like, you need to talk to this guy. Because at that point, Neil was 3 years into being in the Chris Robinson Brotherhood, and they played very long shows. So they were playing 3 hours a night, 6 days a week. And it's a lot to stand up there with a Gibson SG. You have, of course, the Gibson SG is a phenomenal electric guitar, but it only has a certain amount of sounds. So Neil had an idea in his head for a custom guitar that would give him a wider range of sounds. And I saw that article on Scott, and then Neil went and met him, and made this guitar, and Neil played it for thousands and thousands of hours. I love that guitar so much. And this is a great picture of Neil here.
Yeah. So, beautiful guitar. And of course he got another one delivered to him just before, we lost Neil. And, but yeah, so anyway, so going back to the Neil book, Neil was a brilliant photographer. Neil was a brilliant musician, and he was a brilliant photographer. And as we know, in some of his, last wishes that he left for his friends and family, he said, I hope that somebody will take up the task of making a book of my photographs. And I helped Neil on his Ryan Adams book. When he came up with that idea, we actually did all the scans for him here in my studio for that, and talked about actually self-publishing it together, him and me. And it was complicated on many levels. So he ended up working with a big New York City publisher. And so after he passed, I knew how long it took to make a book because I've done 16 coffee table books of my photography. And so I knew it was going to take a year. And so I sort of pushed Gary, to get me the material as soon as you can. And so it was all down in Southern California. And his bandmates, Dan Horn and Adam McDougall, were driving up to the Bay Area in a Sprinter van to play some music. And so they brought these bins, these giant plastic bins of Neil's work to me. And it was a little disorganized and messy and convoluted. And I set my daughter Ricky loose on it, as you mentioned. And so she's a photo person and works on all sorts of photo projects with me as well. And so she actually, drove the ship. I drove the production side of things and kept the ball moving forward. But she drove the creative side of things. She did the photo editing, and she did the creative direction on the book and how she wanted it to look, and kind of keeping it simplistic in terms of really showcasing Neil's photographs. We didn't want to stick, a million little photographs in there. We wanted to really share these big full page photographs. And Neil documented his life. He documented his life on the road. He documented his life as a surfer. He documented his life playing music with other people. He documented his life in the recording studio and as a traveler. And, we took that, and Ricky turned it into a bunch of different sections, and it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful book. And Dave Schools wrote the foreword for the book. Dave is also in my guitar book as well. Dave has done a lot of projects with me. I feel very fortunate to have him on my side and my team, because he's written forwards and afterwards and introductions for numerous books that I've done, and he's incredibly articulate, and I love Dave. Yeah. And I know he's heavily involved in the tribute record that is being made of Neil's music right now. And so the team of Blakesberg and Schools, struck again, and we put this book out, and you can find this book on the Neil Cassell Music Foundation.org website. And there's maybe 400 or 500 copies left, because we did a big Kickstarter and we sold a lot of books, and we made an extra 500 books because we didn't want it to just disappear. And but they're going to go. So if you're interested in great photography, whether you're a fan of Neil Cassell or not, I think you really would dig this book. And of course, it supports a great cause, because the Neil Cassell Music Foundation is doing great work with kids and music and instruments. And so go to that website, neilcassellmusicfoundation.org, and learn more about the book and learn more about Neil and his work. I'm guessing if you're watching this, you know who Neil is. Gary, of course, is the person who has been carrying that torch with Neil for over 30 years and continues to carry it, post Neil Cassell. and we will all keep Neil in our hearts and our minds, and
Mm.
body of work will help us do that, because he was very prolific as a musician and as a photographer.
Well, just to wrap this up, you might have seen me look down a minute ago. I actually just got a email from Dave Schools, who you were just speaking about. His ears must have been burning, and he forwarded me an email from Fender Guitars, and they're actually sending us 6 Fender guitars that we're going to use for the Neil Cassell Music Foundation, where part of our mission is to give instruments to kids in schools who can't get their hands on an instrument and help them get lessons. And that's part of what the foundation does. So that was kind of a cosmic moment there, because that came through right as we were talking about it.
Guitars and Neil, it's all one. So that's awesome. Well, that's great.
Thank you, Jay. Appreciate you coming on. I love looking at your book. I hope some people check it out and order it. It really is a great holiday gift for anybody who loves live music and guitars and photography.
And it's not an expensive book. It's like a $35 book, or something like that with shipping. So it's not an expensive book. It's a good gift. Rockoutbooks.com is my website. Check it out. Happy to sign books for you. Thank you, Gary. I appreciate you having me on your show and taking a walk down memory lane with my photographs.
Thanks, man.
All right.
Really appreciate it.
All right.
Well, that was fun. Talking to Jay Blakesberg. He really is a legend in live photography. If you're at a music festival and you see that photo pit and you see photographers in there, you'll always see Jay, and just loves music. He's probably seen, I can't even imagine how many shows he's seen over the last 40 some years. It's great. And still has the enthusiasm for it, as you could tell. And there you go. Thank you, Jay. Check back in a couple of days for the next episode of Let's Hear It.